everybody. I'm your host, Brian Lin, and welcome to another episode of the Piano Star Masterclass, a 30-minute interview with a guest teacher followed by an hour of masterclass performed by 2 students. During the live stream, you can ask us any questions in the chat, and we will do our best to answer them. You can also sign up to be a performer for these masterclasses and get a chance to perform for a live audience. Today's guest teacher, Fei-Fei, is praised for her bountiful gifts and passionate immersion into the music she touches. She graduated from the Juilliard School, is a winner of the Concert Artists Guild competition, a top finalist at the 14th Van Cliburn International Piano Competition, and winner of the Lincoln Center William Pichek Recital Award. Before the quarantine, Fei-Fei was performing across the globe in concerto performances, recitals, and chamber music collaborations alike. For more information, you can check out her website at feifeipiano.com. Now, without further ado, let's welcome Fei-Fei.
Hi, Brian.
Do you like the music, Fei-Fei?
Okay.
All right. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. So wonderful to see old friend and to connect with you during this time. Yes.
Right, same. I was just gonna tell our audience, Fei-Fei and I would go way back. We're from the same city in China, and later on we were both at the same school in New York. So Fei-Fei, my first question to you is a personal one. So having been in both Shenzhen and New York, 2 really big mega cities, they call it. Mm-hmm. Which one do you like more?
Yes. Actually, that's really hard to answer. I always feel Shenzhen and New York, they share a lot of similarities because they are both immigration cities. It's like a melting pot, people from everywhere. And also, it's such exciting place with a lot of arts, and it's also financial center, everything. So many ways it's very similar. But I feel, well, Shenzhen, of course, all of my family is in Shenzhen, so I miss Shenzhen a lot. But I've studied and lived in New York for a long time, so a lot of my friends live in New York, and so most of my friends are here. So it's really hard.
So it's a choice between family and friends, right? So
yeah.
Right. What about just the environment? Do you prefer a place to another, or is it just
I love
equal?
both places, but I think I've been living in New York for so long, and I really loved how everything is so accessible in New York. Like I love Broadway shows and concerts. Just I think for musicians and artists, New York is so exciting and always so much going on. Yeah.
Definitely. I definitely agree. I think if I could have a choice, I would have New York's culture and its concerts, like you said, and Shenzhen's food, because the food is always better there. But anyway, since we only have a short amount of time, why don't we just jump into our topic really quick, right?
Okay.
So the topic today is about memorization. So the first question I have for you about the topic is why this topic? Why is memorization important in general? Why do we have to memorize pieces?
Right. Yes. Well, I chose today's topic just because I believe all pianists, usually after our recitals, we get asked so often the question, how do you remember all that music? And people are usually so fascinated by that. So I thought I would share some of my experience and tips or like ways that I practice that have helped me a lot with memorizing music quicker and more accurately. So I think to talk about this, I would like to back up a little bit just to say how this tradition of memorizing music started. This trend of performing without using the music started around 19th century, and that was also when the virtuoso phenomenon started. All of a sudden, we had a lot of virtuosic pianists, including Liszt, Thalberg, and Clara Schumann, just to name a few. And for the first time in history, Liszt invented solo recital. That thing never existed before Liszt. He was the first person to turn the piano, to position it differently on stage, so the piano lid would open toward the audience for better acoustics, and also the pianist would face the audience with our profile. So I think this solo recital is so different from any other forms. The chamber music, dances, operas, where we have a lot of players on stage. A solo recital is a one-man entertainment, like a one-man show. So all these recital soloists, they tried everything they can think of to avoid monotony and try to engage their audience and astonish them as much as they can. So that's why starting from that time, we have really virtuosic piano works written with really fast runs, trills, and also, you know, hands crossing and just really flashy gymnastics. And also that was the time they started to perform from memory. Also, it was an effort to impress their audience. So of course, now it's become the new standard and norm. So if you feel frustrated with memorizing music, the first tip is just remember it's Liszt's fault.
That's yes.
No.
We go ahead and blame Liszt. Yes, that's.
Well, but I was joking. But I think personally, I also like to memorize the pieces that I work on, and I often encourage my students to do the same as well. I think not only because we have to do that these days in concerts, but also I feel like having something memorized requires us to first practice more for sure, and spend more time with the music. And I think through that, it really deepens our understanding and connection with the music. Yeah. Okay.
Gotcha. Oh, I just realized.
It's hard to talk to Brian because we know each other so well, and
Right.
we always have had so many laughs together.
I know it's always so fun to see. You can see that.
I know.
I'm not a professional host, as you can see. Okay, so
I think it's usually because I'm really funny and
right.
tell jokes in real life, and it's probably the first time Brian has seen me talk really seriously.
Seriously, yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I don't think we've ever gone, more than a minute without,
Laughing.
cracking a joke. Yes,
Yes.
great. So, yeah, to your point about, playing more virtuosic pieces, I think I also agree with you. I find some pieces even easier to play when you don't have because then you have more time to look at the keys. Right. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
yes. So,
Yeah.
sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me today. Okay. So my my next question would be, what would be your 5, because the topic today is the 5 tips.
I'll give you a little time to
I'm
recover,
sorry.
Brian.
I'm sorry.
Okay. I can just go directly to my...
Totally my fault.
Yeah.
So the topic today is 5 tips on memorization. So I was wondering if you could share with us what are the 5 tips for memorizing, and what can, I think, because the series is for all pianists of all levels, not just advanced and professional pianists, but also beginner and intermediate. So in general, what are your 5 tips for memorizing?
Yes, I have 5 tips, but I think before we get into that, I just want to break down a little bit how our musical memorization works. Actually, I believe you as well. A lot of pianists, we've played instruments for a long time, and we've started memorizing things from a very early age. So sometimes we don't even think about how to memorize. But I think today for our talk, I kind of broke down it for 4 components, really. I think the first would be a muscle memory. Muscle memory meaning we have played the instrument for a long time or practiced the piece for long hours. So we have built the muscle memories into our hands. So sometimes even without thinking, our hands can just go. So I think that's the memory of our physical feeling of playing through a work. And the second component would be the visual memory. I think, of course, some lucky people, they have the photographic memory. They can just look at something and have it memorized. But that's not what I'm trying to get at here. I think the visual memory, I'm thinking it's more simply just our eyes see and supervise our fingers, the movement of our hands when we play, just for example, like where they're jumping to or how they're moving in general. And the third is the memory of the ears, the oral memory. So when we practice and hear a piece a lot, our ears remember the harmonies and know the melody, and a little bit just like the happy birthday songs. So we never had to look at the music and study happy birthday or practice singing it. It's just because we sing it and hear it so much that our ears just know it, and we would never forget how to sing happy birthday. And the last component and the most important, I think, is our brain knowing every detail in the music. And I think that memory requires us to study the score and music really thoroughly and in great details. So now I'm gonna go start with my 5 tips. I think my very first tip would be right fingerings. For me, when beginning to learn piece, I'm quite meticulous with writing fingerings. I'm much better now, but when I was younger, I would, even for octaves, I would write out 5-1, 5-1, 5-1 repeatedly. So I write fingerings not only for the tricky parts, the difficult passages, but also for the easier parts. Sometimes for the easier parts, we feel, oh, this is easy. We could use any fingering. We don't have to write it down. And we end up playing it with different random fingerings each time. There's nothing wrong with using different fingerings each time, but I just feel, for me, I'm a special case. I feel like I'm physically very awkward. Sometimes even when I walk, I had to think, okay, right arm, left leg. Otherwise, I would be walking same side. So I feel like laying out a very well thought out fingering plan at the beginning of your learning process would help you practice better, because fingering is really the choreography of your fingers. So if you find and commit to a good fingering plan, then I think that really helps strengthen your muscle memory. And also another thing I notice is when you have put down some fingering plans and you decide to, leave the piece for a while, when you come back to it and you can see some old fingerings in your music, for me, that really triggers the muscle memory, and it makes relearning much quicker and easier. So my second tip would be...
Before you do that, I just have a follow-up question on that.
Yes.
So let's say you're playing something really easy, like Mozart, like a sonatina, for example, where the famous da da di da di da da, and then it's obviously would you still, when you say easy fingers, would you still write it down like 1, 3, 5, or would you? Yeah, what the how specific are you referring to when you say the easy fingers?
Well, now when I play the Mozart Sonatina, I use the fingerings I wrote when I was 5.
Okay. So you did write the fingers when you were 5.
Well, no, I was joking, but I think even for the really easy part, because for example, even do mi so, you could use like 1, 3, 5 or 1, 2, 4. I think for that, I think at this point, if I go back to that piece, I would really try it and see what fingers I use would create the sound or the color I want. So actually, it's still not that simple. Yes, sometimes doesn't mean when I write something down, I really commit to it, but I think it's just good to have a plan. And later on, I notice I'm not doing what I'm written, then I know something has changed in my mind. I think it's just a good point of reference, and it really strengthens the muscle memory.
So do you think
aware.
do you think besides muscle memory, do you think also visual memory, since you're looking at, I don't know if you have photographic memory, do you think that also helps with the, writing fingers, seeing which finger correlates to which note, or not really? Or is it just strictly for muscle?
I think mostly for muscle memories.
Okay.
And I think another reason why I like to use write down is because when you break down the pieces to practicing small sections, sometimes when you practice something out of the context, then you might end up using something different when if you play through the piece and get to that point. So I think it's good to write it down so you know what exactly you planned to do. I think that's also
understood. Understood.
Yeah.
Okay, your second tip?
Okay, my second tip is a practical one. It's just to use your most productive time to memorize music, because I feel memorization takes and requires so much concentration and consumes really a lot of our brain cells. So I would recommend structuring our practice time in such a way that we are using our freshest mind and most energetic hours to memorize music. For me, for example, my brain feels the freshest when I wake up in the morning, or if I take a nap, I feel also really fresh when I wake up from the nap. So I try to use these hours to memorize. It's impossible for me to memorize anything late at night. I think that's different for everyone, but I think it's good to identify those times and use these hours to tackle this most challenging work. Yes.
So the key there is to find which time works, most efficiently for you, right?
Yeah.
So because maybe some people or are you suggesting that everyone should practice in the morning?
No, I think not everyone's schedule can work out that way, I think, but to find time that you have a fresh mind, I think. Yes.
Understood.
Yeah. So my third tip would be start memorizing a piece early in the learning process. I personally like to start memorizing a piece sooner rather than later. I know this might feel more painful this way to memorize music, as opposed to practicing it enough times and long enough until it becomes gradually and naturally memorized. The reason why I like to start memorizing early is because it forces me to not rely on the muscle memories and the ear memories to memorize the piece. And I think, and before all that memory form in your head, you start memorizing. So it forces our brain to be more analytical, I think, because it requires our brain to actively, identify the patterns, identify the harmonies, the form, the structure, just anything that would help our brain to make sense of this music, to understand it, and to therefore memorize it. So, and also just because it's a really dangerous thing to rely too much on muscle and ear memories, because when we get on stage, we might physically get tense, or the audience might be noisy and it affects how you listen. So I think the brain is really the most important part of memorization. So I would recommend start memorizing a piece early rather than later. Yes.
Can you just again get into a little more specific on that? Just because I'm very interested. So when you say, so let's say you're early in a piece, and then you're learning. Would you start? Do you take, let's say the piece is 2 pages? Would you memorize the first 3 lines first and then go on? Because you obviously can't really do the whole thing at once, right?
Yes.
Or maybe I'm touching up on your other tips.
Yeah.
But,
That's actually a great question. It leads me to my next question. But of course, when I start learning a piece, I read it through a few times first. So just so we know how this piece as a whole looks like before we go into. But my next tip for memorization would be really break the piece down to small sections, small chunks, and either by movements, of course, and by sections, even by phrases, whatever makes sense for you and for the music. I think for me, because our brain, it's the brain that we're trying to utilize to memorize the most. And I feel like we should start right away memorizing music very accurately, meaning we are not just memorizing the notes, because notes is such an important but a very small part of what we see on the music. So right away, I think I will study those small sections really thoroughly and just look at the articulation, the dynamics, the phrasing, the rests, the pedaling, everything, really work everything out in that small section, and then start memorizing it very carefully and accurately, and also very deliberately. I feel like for me, like that way, the memorize is so careful and accurate. I feel like as if we are kind of drawing a map in our brain. It's like very detailed. Yeah, so sometimes I imagine like if this is the end of the world, and all music is destroyed, I'm the only person who has all these repertoire in my head, and I want to write them down and pass on. Like if I'm given a piece of music paper and to write the music down, like how much detail I would remember from that, not only in notes, but all the markings by the composers. So that, I think, it's how detailed, or like we should try to study and memorize. Yeah.
Understood. I have a question on that. So you have a really long piece, and then you have some difficult parts and some easy parts. So would you suggest going at the difficult parts first before you memorize the easy parts? Is that how you would do it, or would you still go from the beginning to the end, but just stopping at the difficult parts a little more?
I think that's probably I think it doesn't matter too much. I personally like a linear kind of a way of memorizing, so I memorize from the beginning, working through the piece. But I think the way that you recommended would be great for more technical works. Like I don't recommend somebody practicing the piece, the whole piece again and again, but really picking out the places that need the most attention first and practice those spots first. Yeah.
Understood.
Yes. Yeah. So I think my last tip, or it's the thing that I usually do when the piece is more or less, already memorized, and when I'm getting ready for a performance, the last tip is for that, like what I would do to secure our memorization. What I usually do is mental practice away from the instrument. Of course, that includes score studies, and also for me, like actually I learned this from Sean Chen, who was also a guest speaker on your series, and also our friend, longtime friend from Juilliard. He told me like what he would do is sit, close his eyes and go through the music in his head as if he's like seeing the music in his mind. And of course, actually it's quite difficult. It's more difficult than it sounds. Sometimes like you get stuck. You're like, I'm not sure what's there. And then you check the score, you clarify it, and then you go back to it and continue. I think that way, again, I think it's the 4 components we talked about. I think this exercise is also about breaking apart this component. So when you are only studying away from the instrument, you don't have the muscle memory, you don't have the oral, you don't even have the visual. You're just test your brain, just see if it knows everything, I think.
Gotcha.
And also I also do a lot of weird exercises. Sometimes I practice with my eyes closed. I think that way, without seeing the keyboard, we forces our ears to really listen more. And also it breaks down our muscle memories a little bit, I think. I think sometimes I listen to a recording and just kind of go through the music in my head with the recording. Sometimes like your brain falls behind, is like can't quite catch up with the recording. I think it's all just exercises to help our memory. Yes.
I see. So all of that, practicing with eyes closed and listening to recording, that's all part of your fifth tip, which is
Yeah.
mental practice. And
Yeah.
on mental practice, we actually had an episode of the Piano Star Masterclass where Nicholas Nemerazzi was talking specifically about mental practice. So,
Yeah.
if one of our audience wants to check it out, you can check out that episode too.
Yeah, you should. Nico is a great friend. He's a really
Right,
amazing
he's
artist.
another
Yeah.
friend of ours.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, just on that point about listening to recordings. So you mentioned about listening and then actively following, right, and remembering the score. Would you recommend passively listening and just
Of
just
course.
having it there and doing other
Yeah.
things? Would that help?
I love, I mean, that's, of course, I think that's a wonderful thing to do. I think, but the method I talked about was more kind of very specific goal is to help us secure memorization. But of course, I mean, with concertos, I listen to, or just anything. We always listen to so many recordings, but I think sometimes to enjoy or to just to see how their interpretations are. So I think the way I talked about was more oriented toward memorizing, kind of. Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so since our time is almost up, my last question for you would be, what would be your personal experience with memorizing? And since you're talking about these, you're sharing these great tips. From your personal experience, have you always been successful with memorizing? And how did you
Yeah.
how did you figure these things out?
Okay. So I really think memorization is like working out in a gym, and it's really like exercising. So the more we do it, the more we exercise our brain, the better and faster and more comfortable we get doing it. But I remember growing up for me in China, memorization was always a big part in school, in all classes, in all subjects. I remember for our Chinese class, we had to memorize and recite hundreds of ancient poems from different dynasties. And for English class, we also had to memorize so much. I still remember I had to memorize the Gettysburg Address like so many times. I think to this day, I can probably still do it. I still remember like 7 years ago, our father brought upon our continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated. So I think the things that I've memorized when I was a kid, it just sticks so well. I think musically, my piano teacher growing up assigned me to study and memorize a piece by Bach almost every week or every other week, starting from the minuets to 2-part, 3-part inventions, to the suites, to Italian concerto, to prelude and fugue. So Bach was really a non-stop for me. I didn't love that back then. I really hated it because it just made me feel really stressed every time going to lessons, having to prepare so much and memorize. But I think looking back, I'm really grateful for all these training or exercises. I feel like I've benefited a lot from it because I'm very used to memorize things. So it doesn't feel something too stressful or difficult. And I'm usually pretty quick with learning and memorizing new repertoire. Yes.
So it's become a habit of yours to always memorize stuff.
Yeah.
Do you do that to your students too? Have them memorize a Bach a week?
I try to encourage them to play more Bach for sure, just because I think Bach was also a great choice of composer to do that kind of exercise because his music just requires the utmost clarity of the player's mind. And Bach, of course, everybody knows is the most difficult thing to memorize. Yes.
Right.
So I think it's always good to play Bach, a lot of Bach. Yeah.
Right. I totally agree with you. I think it's a cultural difference too, in a way. When I first came to the United States, I was 15 at the time. And my biggest impression was that they didn't have to memorize a lot of those mathematical formulas, or they use the calculator a lot. That's what I remember. Because in China, in math classes, we always had to, no calculators. And then
exactly.
when we moved here, everyone was using calculators. So I think, that's something that I remember, that here memorization is of course still encouraged, but I think less in the culture, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think one thing I just want to mention is I feel definitely every person's brain works so differently, and every musician has a unique way of approaching new music and learning differently. So, and I think we always have to keep in mind, especially for students and some adult students, memorization, it shouldn't be a goal that we try to achieve. It's just something that helps us know the piece better, and don't
and
be
present it better too, right?
Just
you have more time to focus on the music that you've worked on.
Yeah.
Cool. Great. Those were really, really great tips. And if you miss any of it, you can always watch a replay on our YouTube page. So